This is going to be an odd place to start, and hopefully not adversarial. But that first reaction to the D&D, your first video response, or wait, no,
Right.
I'm not sure it was you. There was one video response that was just like really severe. I mean,
Right.
there were a couple of responses to the first one, the standalone complex one, and it was almost as though people had to get over the idea that I wasn't attacking anything. You know,
Right.
it
Yeah.
it
I
it, it
think it
took
takes.
they're kind of like, wait, well, wait, where, what, huh? No, hold on here, what? What? Wait, it was kind of this odd response that
Yeah, I think people get their hackles up about like they're if you're like a depends on who it is. If it's a D&D person, if it's somebody that decided that they haven't agreed with everything that happened at the forge, whatever. You don't know, like it could be anything. people
I
get
know.
people get ticked off, but I try to look at it as I just saw the kind of metaphor. I'm like, this is going to be interesting, and I was like, I don't know. For a second, I almost got like, oh, I wonder how he's going to do this. And I'm like, no, let me just see. And it turned out to be really interesting,
I appreciate that. I've been talking about it for a little while, and I actually was, I think by writing, and I've of course had written up all this stuff, and then I was realizing, I'm not really in the zone where I want to write a book about Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not,
Right.
I also am kind of in the zone where I'm not really ready. I've written nonfiction before. I've written evolutionary biology. I've written about role playing before. You know, I want a different kind of presence, and I realized, maybe just working it out verbally is the way to go. Maybe just working it out verbally, and as best as I can. And I will say I make a lot more mistakes talking than I do writing, or rather, with writing, you get to correct them. And so you end up with, there are things I say where I'm like, oh, that was backwards, or that was wrong, and sometimes I annotate
Well,
it. And
welcome
then
to the
other
video
things I just,
producer's life.
yeah, I know. And then there are things that I just plain got wrong. For example, I totally didn't know that in the Holmes box, dice came first, and they ran out of the dice and then put chits in. I just
Yeah.
was, I'm in a lot of ways I'm speaking as a customer, or as a practitioner, as a kid,
Right.
which means that there are scholars out there who are going to say, oh, you got fucked that up, and I'm kind of like, well, yeah, but we didn't know, man.
It's what it's, it's
We
what you,
didn't
it's what you
know.
saw. I probably one
Yeah.
of my favorite things. I was listening to a one of the videos that Tim Kask has put out. He's been putting out videos, and he's talking about there's purists about the original original game, and they're talking about the first run, the second run, the third run. This is this and this is that.
Wow.
I hate to break their hearts. But we had a whole stack of these in the attic. They were product, and we just mixed them.
That's right.
It's like
Oh no.
they're talking about like where the staple is, and like this the staple's
Yeah.
here,
Holy
and he's
cow.
like I hate to tell them, but
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
we just so there's
Yeah.
but there's what we saw, and there's like
Right.
what actually they actually produced, and that's interesting. That's why like I mentioned in my video, but that people, I think some people got upset because you mentioned the whole mishmash of products that were out there, and a lot of people will be like, well, that wasn't my experience. I'm thinking, well, how could that have been of your experience? Because what my experience was like, I bought
Right.
these ones that I saw, I physically bought, and I wasn't aware of the other ones, or maybe I'd see them in
Yeah.
passing, or I'd see stuff and I'm like, well, I already have D&D. I don't need to buy that. I mean, I had no idea they're going to be collector's items. I was 13 years old.
I
Who
know,
cared?
I know, and my take too is that I thought I was attempting to say that any one of us was going to have a unique profile of
Right.
this.
That's what
Well,
I got.
not to put it too unkindly, but kibble, right?
Right.
It was this, it was kind of like opening someone else's glove compartment and seeing what was in there. It was this. I greatly uh regret not having my those TSR supplements. The I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
didn't have all five, but I had a few, and two or three, and you know, I wouldn't mind holding those.
Right.
It's sort of the way that I feel, although though that's perhaps more sentimental. I feel both sentimental, and I'm also just really glad I had them as games. Is my Melee and my Wizard from
Right.
the Fantasy Trip. Those are the
Yeah.
those are among. So when you want to talk about like precious items, right? That's
Right.
um,
Exactly. I think the other where some of my the other people like friends that I talked to got upset, and I sometimes was like, well, they said, well, there was all these other games going on at the same time, and like, yeah, but like the reality of the situation is that was huge. I mean, it doesn't matter those other. It's not saying those other games were beta or bad or anything like that. It's just kind of like Christianity. It was a roll of the dice. Which religion ended up taking off? Well, it happened to be Christianity.
yeah. It's in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, especially in those early phases when it didn't even have that name. Like I said, we people variously called it different things, right?
Right.
Fantasy wargaming is the one that I remember. That's what everybody called it.
Right.
And the the thing that interests me too about the other games, I think I tried later in the second video to try and get across. Well, no, even in that first one, I've tried to get across the notion that it was the very absence of that core book. It
Right.
was the very absence that maybe mysticized D&D. Part of it was that that's where the press went. I mean, if there was a magazine article or a newspaper article, it was about Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've
Somewhere.
got some clipped. I got some
Right.
clipped out from like 1981 or two. That's still somewhere in one of my scrapbooks because it was
Right.
cool. I played this game. I cut it out.
Yeah, but there was,
Yeah.
but there wasn't going to be one there. I don't think there ever was one about RuneQuest like that.
No,
I mean,
not in a newspaper.
yeah, exactly. And so, who knows what causality is involved in that? I mean, there must be some, but I don't know what it is. Except
Yeah.
that RuneQuest was like an actual object, and
Right.
D&D kind of wasn't.
Yeah, it
And
definitely was this thing I
yeah,
heard about for years before I actually finally laid my eyes on. I think it was probably I probably got the timeline right. I think it was I would see it in like Marvel comic books. Remember they used to have those
right.
those page ads, and it was
Oh
I
my
think it was
God, you're right. Yes,
when the Moldvay Basics that was just coming out, and please, Almighty Wizard, don't kill me. There's a
that's right.
dragon, and some fighter had a sword. Oh, it's the mighty sword. Whatever the hell it was. And so finally my parents buy me this, and I think the basic the two Moldvay books or box sets were in. I think it was probably the local toy store. It was like Child World or Toys R
Yeah,
Us or something.
yeah.
And then the music store actually had all the advanced D&D stuff. And then you had to go to the head shop in a different
I
town
love
to
that.
get the really cool dice.
Just love that. The thing that is true is that I am atypical, maybe, or at least seem atypical, in that Moldvay is the one that I completely missed.
Yeah.
The
It was out for a really short time. It was like
Yeah,
a
but it
year or two.
has apparently. I mean, just looking at our age group now, there's this huge footprint.
Yeah,
And
enormous.
yeah, and the okay. Here was my situation. I tried to explain a little bit, but I realized how nuanced it was. My friend had um Holmes, and
Right.
I think I got my copy from him. I think he didn't want it and I got it, I think. And then I was looking around and the monster manual came out and that reprint of the 1974 came out, the really white
Right.
box, the actual box that
Right.
was white. And so those all kind of landed on me more or less simultaneously. So that is a really
Wow.
weird assortment of things to be looking at
Yeah,
and
that's a
trying to
mix.
dope
That's a
out.
mix.
And that's really what I encountered. Remember too, I am a total fantasy science fiction kid. I've already read The Lord of the Rings.
Right.
I've already done all that. I've already delved. I mean, by 12, at this point, 1976, I turned 12, and I was reading, Harlan Ellison and, really getting into the whole cosmic thing of trippy science fiction, trippy Marvel comics,
Oh
and
yeah.
I
Yeah.
was really heavily into that stuff. And so to me, reading, and I was pretty well read in fantasy at that point. I'd read all the Narnia books, I'd read all the Prydain books, I'd read, I basically, and I was reading a lot of Moorcock at that point too.
Right.
So I'm right in there. I am your tween trippy fantasy kid, and so I keep trying to. I've interacted with Jeffro Johnson, who wrote Appendix N, and
Hmm.
especially when he was getting that project going. And I was trying to convey to him that from my perspective, even as a tween, whoever it was who was writing these fantasy role playing books, I was perceiving as a peer.
Right.
Especially back then, kids and adults who were into fantasy and science fiction just interacted as equals. It was one of the
Yeah, you
few
find
things.
one of those guys
Right.
like, hey, what's going on?
Absolutely, because there was no mainstream for that stuff, so you found each other. And
Right.
so and so it's not like this guy delivered fantasy to me, you know?
Right.
And it wasn't, and so to me, it's kind of like, oh, really? We, you writing this, me getting this, you have this thing that we're due. And so but confronted with those texts, it really wasn't where my interest in fantasy were going. You could not see it. Deities and Demigods wasn't out.
Right.
Stormbringer wasn't out. I bought that in my sophomore junior year of college. Or sorry, not college, high school. When it came out, 1981. And before that, though, if you were looking for fantasy role playing the way I would conceive of it, given my reading, given my attitudes, you know, D&D just wasn't providing it.
Right. Right. I gotcha.
And yet I look at it. I mean, I look at it now, and the undergroundness of Holmes and the presentation of a lot of that stuff, I totally speaks to me. But where is that trippiness in the game itself?
Yeah,
You
I mean,
know,
like
that's
my experience was a little bit. It's a little bit different, but to kind of getting to the same point at some point, because I was definitely the same thing. My father, like, I'm a little kid. My stepfather like turned on the channels, like, you will watch Star Trek. I
right.
watch
Yeah.
Star Trek. And, at 5 years old, he gives me The Hobbit. You will read this book. I think I'd read the whole
Yeah.
series by the time. I mean, I was way before I was 10.
Right.
And yeah, I had to go back and really. I mean, Silmarillion and all that took
Exactly.
a.
But you went through it. Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah,
Single digit ages,
and
and
that
you're
was.
like,
And
you're
this is
into the
cool.
parts you
So
can understand. Yeah.
yeah, member of the science fiction book club. My dad got me in there, and so like I'm reading all this crazy stuff, and so like I get D&D. I don't think we had as many games in the area that I was. I mean, because I've talked to Anthony about this a lot, that it's regional. There's like sometimes these cultures of play just grew up regionally.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when I got exposed to me, I got the Mulvey basic set. I had friends that said, "Hey man, you really want to play this advanced D&D," and so I didn't want to be looked down on, so I
Oh,
got the
that's
advanced books.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Could kick myself because
yeah,
Holmes, I mean, personal opinion, Holmes
yeah.
out of the box is so
Yeah.
much more playable than AD&D
Oh,
that
absolutely. Yeah.
that I'm like kicking myself now. I'm like, idiot, you had the one to play right in front of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, but you don't want your friends to laugh at you.
I know.
It's quite,
I know.
that's basic. You want to be basic. So I got all that, but so I mean, I put the two together, and I'm like, man, this is very different. And I'm like, I really like the simplicity and the elegance of Molde. That's one of the reasons I think it has such a big footprint. Is it's like super elegant. But I'd like, well, I'm going to learn this other one, which seems to be more advanced. But I was not exposed to at the same time, the original books and the Holmes, and everything else. So I didn't know there were that many different versions. And I did not know, like, I mean, I played AD&D for years, and then, became an adult and had kids and a family, and put such childish things aside for a good period of time. And in 2010, I returned to the hobby. I couldn't tell you exactly why, but
You
I was like,
mentioned
man,
that. Yeah, that
yeah,
struck me as like a seriously, you know, that's a real. I had my in and out,
right,
and it really had to do with me grappling with. It's actually fairly substantial because I really was grappling with whether the medium in and of itself had anything to offer,
right,
whether this very activity was anything except fandom.
Right. No,
And you
I
know,
gotcha.
if you're going to be playing fantasy and this game is telling you how to do it, am I not just better reading and enjoying the books and being fantastic, you know, in my head?
Yeah.
And what is this actually doing except sitting around with people whom I'm not really enjoying hanging out with?
Yeah.
And so I grappled with that, and yet, unsurprisingly, back and forth, right, back and forth. And what really did it for me, though, um, RuneQuest almost got me back. RuneQuest and
Right.
Stormbringer almost got me back when I was like, you know, there's some substance in Glorantha. But still, you know, I could see that playing wasn't. I needed a community. I didn't have one. Um, but in college, Champions came out,
Right.
and I returned to comics at the same time as returning to role playing, and they were completely combined, and I had the right people to do it
Right.
with. And it was really a match made in heaven. People who did not know about role playing, particularly, who were exactly my age and had kept up with the comics and gave me a stack of what I had missed, you
Oh
know, in the
God,
last
yeah.
few years. And and I was like, you know, geez, you know, this role playing thing is really cool. And there it was, third edition of Champions. Again, in my opinion, creme de la creme. It couldn't have been better timed. That
Right.
game, not the ones before, not the ones after. That edition picked it up, and we were off to the races. And so it's been, but it took a long damn time to get back to fantasy role playing. I had friends who insisted we do it, and it was very grudging on my part. I was like, you know, this shit, it can't do fantasy. You know, you can follow
Right.
these rules, but there is no fantasy book out there that was written from somebody looking at a spell list.
Right.
You know,
Here's the funny thing that I what happened to me as far as like, coming to that realization, because I still, I mean, I don't dislike it,
mhm.
it's because but like I used to look at the books longingly every once in a while, but like I didn't have anybody to play with. And then finally, I couldn't tell exactly what happened. I think I met some people that like they played, or they would be willing to play. I'm like, all right, let's do this thing again. And I find out that, of course, the internet has all kinds of stuff now. So let me go find some stuff on here. And then it was like, what the hell just happened?
Oh yeah,
Because because I have some of my friends that play, and they sit down, they bring out this game, called Pathfinder, which is, I mean, it's third edition D&D is what it is. I mean,
right,
it's D20, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I mean, the names look right, but what the hell is this?
right.
And and so like I discovered Dragonsfoot, I discovered all my people. But one of the things that occurred to me at some point, I realized is that like the tropes of D&D, like what the genre that D&D is D&D. Like that's
Absolutely right. That's
the
absolutely right.
like
No, I really struggled against that because I saw it happen to fantasy, and I experienced it so painfully in the '80s as I watched the fiction genre turn into this, well, in my opinion, a rather warped and distorted version of itself. Um, and there's a it's an unequal effect, but it is a cross effect. Games that are written, game materials that are written so that you'll buy the book or in celebration of the book, in,
yeah,
you know, and then books that are starting to be written by gamers and being basically fantasy. So
right,
in the early '80s, you've got the first Dragonlance at the same time as you're seeing Stephen Brust and other people writing, Will Shudderly and Emma Leovec, and um, the you can see the first hints of it in Thieves World a little bit. You can see basically, yeah, gaming that's written with an eye toward celebrating some series, and
right,
series that are written because the authors are playing the games. And the economically, the books are the powerhouse.
right,
So it's not, like I say, it's not an equal, exchange, but it is very much an exchange. And I say the apotheosis of it all is probably the Wheel of Time, which is that's in the early '90s, when you
Right.
can't tell if it's a book based on a game or a game based on a book or a is it fanfic or is it, it's all one
Right.
now. And it's the apotheosis of the gamer geek who is now the glorious author that every one of us had dreamed that we should be, and
Right.
how many, I don't know, and going through the ideal of the 80s, the DM who desperately wanted to publish his epic fantasy series, and he
Yeah.
knew that the way he would get his epic fantasy series, and it would be a selling point, is that this had been a campaign. We played this.
Yeah.
And so we all had to agree that our characters were proprietary for him. And so he, looked ahead to the grand future where this would all be. And it became clear, I mean, the modules were written toward him as target audience. you know
Right.
um
Yeah. Fortunately, I missed all that. I mean,
right,
like, you
well, it
know,
was
I
very
did a few
painful. I
things,
mean,
and
especially coming from my pulp, my retro pulp background, right, my pulp revival background, and also having been trained by Roy Thomas in the Conan the Barbarian comic to focus on Howard.
right. Yeah.
And so I fell right into that window after the revival in the 60s, before the movie, right in that
Yeah.
window when you could discover Howard. And that comic was the only place to do it. There was no one else
Right.
who was going to admit that there was one author to follow here. And so there I am, and I'm going, there is no Conan of the kind I think of. There is no Conan in fantasy role playing. He's
Right.
just not
Yeah.
there.
Absolutely.
And I don't care how many source books you publish that call themselves Lankmar, City of Thieves, whatever. Lankmar is not mapped.
Right.
You know, don't give me a map and say that you're giving me Lankmar. That's not the way it works. And so I really was frustrated. I mean, to this day, I mean, I have tons of books with fantasy maps in them and citadels and countrysides and stuff. And a great map is a great thing if it has content that makes this fun to play. And there's lots of ways for maps to be wonderful, wonderful things. But if you're talking about world building, the stories come first, and the maps are drawn by people who like the stories. And
Yeah. Yeah. I got what you're saying there.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so and now I was looking at, the new fantasy series by David R. Eddings, and you open up, and on the first page, of course, the frontispiece, there's the damn map, and you're looking at the map and saying, you know what, I bet through the course of this novel we're going to hit every single spot on this map. And sure enough, your little party
All right.
marches from place to place, and you can follow it on the map. And so you're just going, oh man, this is painful, because what
Right.
I wanted my excess back. I mean, I clutched my copy of Tanith Lee's Knight's Master from 1978, and I said, this is you can't pry this away from me.
Right. Right.
We can't lose this, people. We can't lose this. You can't just read about a thief character who receives wizard training, and he is described, and I've never forgotten this, Raymond Feast's Wizard Apprentice,
Right.
where the character was one of the later books. One of the characters is described in character sheet terms, at the top of
Yeah.
human potential for dexterity, stuff like that. Exactly. I mean, that's the pros in the fantasy book. And you're like, oh, give me a
Yeah.
fucking break.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
I really, really suffered through this period of this, and really said, no, we are making the superhero thing work. And I was struggling my way into actually learning that we could actually make our own stuff be good,
Right.
and so I'm struggling my way into those skills, and thinking something about that genre, something about that medium, something about the way we're doing this is working in a way that I could never see happening in fantasy. And really, it wasn't until ages and ages later that I really felt like I was doing it.
Yeah, well, I haven't. I just kind of this different thing. I was just thinking of, like, what happened for me was I got pretty zen for a while about the idea that if we're going to play D&D, like, this is going to be D&D fantasy. It's going to be self-referential. It's not going to be like this book,
Right.
So And then, like I said, I put it down for a long period of time. I wasn't aware of all this other stuff that had happened, not just to D&D or whatever the hell it
Right.
was, but to all these other games that showed up. And so, I come back, and of course, my friends are playing this what's D&D. One of the things it's turned into, or evolved, is it's spread its tentacles everywhere. I discovered this whole Dragon's Foot thing too, and then I have to take this I get this education all of a sudden, like, oh my God, there was all these other versions and stuff. And I remember meeting people online, and thank God for like the online community, because I mean, this is who I play with now.
Right.
This is the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that we were looking for in the '80s. I mean, like, why didn't all these other games like get the same kind of press? Because
Right.
I tell people, like, dude, we have to send in a self-addressed stamped envelope
Oh,
to
I
someplace.
know. I know. No, there's just
Hope
no.
the guy remembered to mail you something back. It's
Man.
not, but
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I started looking for, it's funny when you made the essential video, the essentialism video, like number 4.
That one seemed to hit pretty hard. Yeah. Yeah.
That was like one of those ones, because that's what I was looking for. Is like,
Yeah.
there's this essential something that I remember about playing, and it ain't in this game.
Right.
And then it's not in this 4th, and I'm not knocking them. I picked them up, and that's why I kind of started talking about what I decided to call the homunculus effect, for lack of a better term. It's like somebody else makes a version of this, but they emphasize different parts. And
Right.
maybe torch.
No, I completely get that. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's a bad game.
Right.
But sometimes, like, some other guy decides, well, the real essential ingredient of D&D or of fantasy role playing or of role playing is this one thing over here, and I pick it up, and that's great. But this thing has a gigantic, feat.
Right. Yeah.
And where's the head?
Yeah.
Where's the head? I'm looking for the head.
Yeah. What's interesting, to run with your analogy, and I don't think we're disagreeing. The really scary moment is when you look around and realize that all of them, including the one you've chosen, they're all homunculi like that.
Oh, of course they are.
That's
the people
crazy.
Look at mine. It's got this big head.
Exactly. And so then you're looking around and go, wait a minute. There isn't a body. I mean, there isn't the proportioned one. There isn't one. And so and that, I think, is really the jarring moment. I'm catching heat at the moment. The essentials one, seems to have stung more people. Maybe it's just because, certain names are mentioned and people don't want their names mentioned by me or something like that. But it is also tricky because that's the attitude, the approach where there's a great, I guess it's in all of them, there's a great deal of pride, in finding your way, in finding the thing, and I'll give a lot of credit to all of the people, or the approach that I'm thinking of as essentialist. All of them value play as play. All of them value doing it. And I see that, I see that that's actually something that I don't want to take that away from anybody, that they're happy with how they're doing it. I mean, more power to you, do that, do it. And it's, but that's very different from my criticisms of the orthodoxy, where bluntly, and this is, I mean, I make no apologies for this. I know a lot of people who suffered long hours of not really enjoying themselves very much because of their faith in what TSR had provided for them. Their faith in that membership. And it's really, I mean, if you missed the second edition, and I missed it too procedurally, because I would have nothing to do with it. When missing the whole second edition plethora of, oh man, tons and tons and tons of how to materials, how to get through the wilderness, how to do this, how to do that, and much of it, especially just tons of the adventures, it's just badly done. The if you ever go back and look through the modules for stuff like Al-Qadim or Planescape or anything like that, the ratio of vision for the core book to pedestrian railroading for the modules is enormous. I mean, it's really painful to see how someone had a really great idea for let's play fantasy.
Right.
And then what do? You bump your way through these designated little things that you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
that was one of the funny things because like my culture of play, and like we bought a couple of modules and looked at them. That's kind of neat. And generally, you look at them like there's no way you can live through that, because they were
that's
meat
right.
grinders for the
Right,
most part.
right. Yeah,
It was it was they were literally like I didn't realize they were tournament modules, but sometimes my friends and I would get together and play them to see if we could make it. And so it was a tournament.
right.
But when we played for real, I mean some of the and thank God I ran into some guys that were playing, at least played like I did, or like
Yes.
it was one of those happy accidents. And we were actually playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Some old Grogdar says, "Hey, you want to play this?" We all meet each other and meet up, and it's a couple guys that had never played this type of game before, and we just happened to have the same style of play, and
Right,
it just worked.
right.
There we were being our characters, and the guy plunked down this world. And there was a couple of them. It wasn't really a story. It was just kind of like there was a couple of situations, and it was, I mean, in fact, it was a sandbox,
Right.
and we just did, and that was the culture of play I grew up in. Was the idea that okay, I'm really this guy. This world's really like this. The world is in motion. Like, let's and let's go here. And every once in a while, we do something, and like we talk to Joe at the end of the day. He goes, man, everything I thought was going to happen. I got a week to get this to figure out what the hell's
Yeah,
going on
right.
next. It was great, but
Yeah.
that was but I remember, even reading something like, like a Circle of Hands and some of the things when it says, "Don't prepare a story," and I mean it. I'm like, well, yeah. Why would
Yeah.
I do that? And so,
Well,
like,
exactly. Yeah,
you know,
yeah. It's
and
it
so the second edition of Module Chains, I was like, I wouldn't want to do that.
I know. I know. Yeah, it's really to me it's having sort of lived through it and having
Yeah,
that get so standardized in games like Shadowrun and the White Wolf games and stuff like that. Really, I mean by the mid 90s I was in a state of like open revolt.
yeah,
Just where is my fantasy fiction? Where is role playing like I know it can be done? Where is, what is going on here? And so and then of course that tied in perfectly to knowing a lot of comics professionals at the time and being actually really tight with them and learning a lot about the economics of comics and things like that. And I was really heavily influenced by Dave Sim with the comic Cerebus the Aardvark, which
right,
was at that time in the mid 90s campaigning very heavily for creator ownership. So that's really what Sorcerer and the Forge arose out of, was that sort of sense of economic revolt. It was like, look, it's early days of the internet. Here we are. We've all got our emails now. We have web
right,
rings now, right?
yeah,
And so, yeah, exactly. And so you don't have to know what FTP means anymore to do this thing. And
right.
so
We have
we
chat rooms.
that's right. I was gonna say, yeah, Usenet, baby. Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
and so
ICQ and all that good stuff.
yeah, and so basically it was like, look, you can. I mean, and then you look around and people are discoveries are happening. You suddenly realize games that have been they're not dead. Marvel Superheroes isn't dead. People are playing the shit out of that game
Right,
and stuff like that. You suddenly discover all of these games that have been alive through play the whole time. And people are finding each other like, oh my God, you play that too. What have you been doing with it? And
right,
this is happening. And I said, you know what? Dave Sim is right, especially with this kind of creative work. There is no reason on this earth why you should go kissing some company dude's ass who's nobody but another geek just like you anyway to publish your stuff. There is no reason. And let's get back to the 70s. Let's get crazy again. There's nothing wrong with a pamphlet if it's a good game,
right.
and let's do it. And so the Forge was really my attempt to create to foster an underground again and to get away from the ideals. Now, production value and I remain uneasy, very uneasy compatriots.
Right.
And I can only look at Jim Raji and
Oh
say,
yeah,
you, my friend, are dancing a very, very difficult tightrope to maintain yourself at that level of production and performance and economic gain and stay street, you know?
yeah. I don't know how he does it because I
Yeah.
mean he's right. He's right.
It's,
And you know, you look at his apartment in the
yeah.
picture. I don't know how big his apartment is, but it's like, well, it's just boxes. Like your
That's
wife
right.
must really
Right.
love
Yeah.
you.
I was just talking with him last week, and yes, there he was,
Yeah.
practically sitting on a box of boxes almost. And I, or a box of books, I mean. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so he's feeling that line, I mean, as far as I can tell. But I always thought that, okay, make it work. And I guess you could say the same for him. Make it work with staples first,
Right.
or your shitty little ring, plastic ring binding. Make that work first. And if people are playing it, then go where you can. Go
Right.
where the money lets you go. But if you hurl the money into it and then jump after the money, well, that doesn't seem to
Yeah.
have served anybody very well. Um,
Yeah.
the economics of D&D is also worth talking about. I mentioned in the video the truth, which is that it was nobody would admit just what a freaking albatross that thing was to so many
Right.
people. Nobody would admit just how so much of its alleged presence, its market dominance, so much of that was just externally injected funds. The that there was no way to look at shelf space competition and say that that was due to play success based,
Right.
presence. And that's what the internet showed us, was that play based excitement was actually occurring with a number of other games, at least as
Right.
much. And so yeah, trying to get to that is kind of where the Forge came from. You mentioned, I think, your one of your videos began with an intro that I've found familiar in the last years, which is sort of an extensive acknowledgement of how much someone doesn't, agree with me. It's kind of like, I'm going to
Right.
talk about what Ron says. By the way, let me get the standard disclaimer over with. I don't really like or agree with the guy, you know,
Yeah.
and
Mine was a
and
little nicer than
I know, but
that.
it's fascinating. It's like kind of like, well, you're going to agree with or work off something that I said that you're finding interesting, not you personally, but I'm talking like more
Right. Right.
generically. But you have to sort of make it clear that this is a one-off.
Right.
You have to make it clear that you're not, it's not like I'm in his camp or anything, but this one time I kind of find this part interesting, or I kind of agree with, and some of Anthony's first videos about some of my work were a little bit the same. He kind of like worked his way around carefully to finally saying, and I really like this game, you
Right.
know. And so yeah, but so I thought maybe with the risk of at the risk of sounding like I'm begging for something, which I'm not, I guess, but I'm
Right.
curious, what are some of the things we could talk about anything that I've said or written about in the past that are, at least if it's interesting, only if it's interesting to you,
I
to
was thinking
examine?
about that because I figured, well, you're going to ask. He's going to ask.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. It's been so long, and I just didn't have the time to go digging through the internet.
Oh,
We could always talk again. I'd go find, but like, because it's just crazy,
yeah, exactly.
But it's funny because like how I got introduced to this guy Ron Edwards, the devil, was
Yeah.
that I get involved in some internet communities, and I kind of find my home at like Dragon's Foot because at least these guys kind of play the same games, except for those weird second edition guys I'm not sure about, but like um, but then I get involved in other communities, and I remember I made this video, my first YouTube video, and it was a response to this guy Tetsubo 57, and he said something about like old school versus modern games, and I was really very stuck in that paradigm at the time. Old school, modern. I'm old school, because I was just trying to figure this crap out.
Sure.
And I just knew
sure.
that wasn't me.
Right.
And so I make my rebuttal, and it was really mostly about. It didn't really matter what the rebuttal was, but it kind of struck a nerve in the OSR community, and it went viral, which meant it was a niche video about a niche hobby and a niche, so several hundred views. Like
I know. It's really funny. It's like what's the phrase? Famous among people who like that sort of thing.
Right, exactly, exactly.
It's like, oh, great.
So I get some people, like a lot of people link my video to other stuff, and so I get. I couldn't tell all the names now, and if I did, I probably wouldn't tell you anyway. But there were just people in camps that were more vocal and more aggressive and more assertive, and people I believe had probably had run-ins with you, probably had talked.
Well,
and
the funny thing is how few of them did. There's the OSR crowd who I did have a lot of contact with. I typically remain friendly with. I mean, and not only that, but the interactions were really positive. People who read Sorcerer and Sword and were like, "Oh, that so turned me on. It made me, run back and like figure out the books that turned me on, about my fantasy, whatever." But so there, if we're thinking about some of the same people who have really invested a great deal of time in generating an image of me that serves them on the internet, none of them I ever actually interacted with.
Yeah. And what's weird too, because there's people, like some of the people, like I resonate, like some topics I resonated with them on. I agreed with them, like, and so there was that. I mean, I'm sure there were things taken out of context. And once again, this is a while ago now, and I think a lot of people just. It took me a while to kind of warm up to the whole idea of the big model and all that kind of stuff that the Forge was doing, and now read it and kind of had more experiences and come like, I think this part here is really, I think this is right. Like I'm really, in fact, you and I would probably disagree very, quite a bit about simulationism, but that's a different talk.
Yeah, it is. Although again, the trouble is that the texts that are available,
right,
they were really, really based on like the dialogues of the moment. And my phenomenology talk is really where I'm coming from now, and have been for a long time, where what everybody seems to call simulationism, although it does seem to be all things to all men, is what I think everybody wants.
Right. No, I get it.
As the medium now, and so instead of being equivalent to those other things I'm talking about, no, that's the stuff that we work with.
Yeah, I would.
And so I tend to be. I'm not sure that I don't agree with myself in 2002 writing about simulationism.
Right. One of the problems I probably agree with 2002. But see, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
It's interesting. I'm actually interested in the discussion, so don't get me wrong.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things too. Well, that was part of it. And a lot of the people, there are people that didn't like it. Or just found it offensive or whatever. And I can do everything with any game, and I do all these things at once. And one of the things looking back on like my experience with these guys when we played Limitations of Flame Princess in 2010 was like, I realized all of a sudden like none of us were doing, our agenda was all the same. Like we all showed up there and we all wanted the same game experience. Right. I would call it Right to Dream, and I would say we were all very playing as the character, and everything else was secondary.
Right.
And that was the prime interest. And I just actually had a conversation with a friend of mine where we're talking about, we're 98% there, but he has, whereas I don't give a rat's ass about the story. And if I look back at the transcript and see story elements, oh, that's cool. But if I don't see any, okay, no, who cares?
Right.
It's like, what are we doing right now? I'm Philippe Moreau and I'm playing All for One Regime Diabolique as a musketeer. That's who I am. I don't look for an arc or whatnot. And my friend, it's close, but he wants to see recognizable story elements.
Right. He wants to feel them when they happen. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So so I would say that like our hierarchy of where we put these different things. I would say, I would still advocate for Right to Dream being a thing. However, and that's just for me, because at first I think this is all BS, and then I'm like, wait a minute, that's what I do. Like that's when I feel in the zone. Right. And like when I'm interfacing with the mechanics of the system too much. When I'm doing this too much step on up, of course I did that. I was a kid. We all played D&D to win and all this kind of stuff. But there's this point, like, what? I just sick of this. It's flat.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
for me, and I have friends that love it, and it's not a bad thing. But then, there were other times when like, let's do this thing to create the coolest or the most compelling story, and not like a pre-planned one, but let's,
Right. But if
and
you're primed for like grabbing it when you see it, or grabbing the
right,
moment to,
right,
I find, you see, the trouble is, and I've been accused of not of my preferences blinding me, that when I am in character and involved and completely playing in a fashion that is extremely unconsidered,
right,
that's when I am usually punching all of those story elements
right,
as hard as that can be done. In other words, it's moments where all of the emotional resonances and potentials and crises of the fiction are driving hard. And so I guess what I'm talking about is that because it's like that for me, am I merely missing that a person can be as engaged and not have those particular elements firing particularly hard, and they don't care if they do or not? And so is it just me or my preferences blinding me? I've been accused of that. And the there's that dialogue I had with Vincent where I tried to really give that. I mean, I tried in the Right to Dream concept to give that possibility as much leeway as I could.
right,
And so is it a grudging leeway and people respond to that? They say, oh, look, he's obviously grudging allowing that we might exist in our grubby little way, you know? I mean, is it, and there are people who accuse me of that. You're like, you damn us with faint praise. You say you allow us how we might. Thank you ever so much. That's not the way you write about gamism. You write about step on up with joy, you know? You write about
yeah,
step on up with respect and with okay. Munchkin sons of bitches, at least you like what you're doing, that's and there are games for which I will jump into that mode. Not that many, because I'm not sure that many role playing games are that well designed for it, but I can. And
right,
so, but you don't say that about the Right to Dream stuff. You don't give it that respect, that equality with your preferences that that you do for gamism. So yeah, you allow for us, but we're second class to you, Ron. you know so that's kind of, I know that accusation or that response to my writings, and I've always tried to say, well, I'll do my best. And in phenomenology, I finally said, I'm going to allow for it, but in my experience, a lot of the people who've been really heavily into what you're talking about, a lot of them were real passive aggressive step on uppers. And then other people I know, and I actually accuse, if you will, Anthony of this, of saying, well, yeah, we do that story thing, but we don't mean to. It's just organic. And that's where I throw up my hands and say, but that's what I'm talking about. If you have to suffer and make it happen, then you're not doing it. you know and so
yeah.
that,
I get your
yeah.
perspective. I
So
think
I don't know. I mean, I can't escape if it is a bias that says what you're talking about isn't, quote, good enough, then I accept it. I can't see past the bias.
yeah,
And I accept that may be the case. I can't dictate that it is or isn't, right? So
yeah, I don't feel so grubby though.
yeah. Well, I know.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh,
I don't
I
want to.
unplugged myself. I can't
Yeah.
hear a damn thing. But
Yeah.
this is the
Yeah.
time to really swear at me. Hold on.
No. Yeah.
I'm back. I'm
All
back.
right. All right. No, it's good. I like it, and I like the different perspectives on it. And I hope that the phenomenology presentation is such that it says, let's just all quit having a cow.
Yeah, no, it's
And
a
I
good one.
never
It's a good one. I
meant
enjoyed that series.
never meant Creative Agenda to be hard. I never ever
Yeah.
did. And
Well, it's
and maybe the thing to do was to just, I mean, Vincent says, quit classifying. Just let every gameplay, let every instance be its own agenda. Quit talking about it. You're only getting everybody upset.
Right.
And
No, I
I
recall that.
and that's kind of his perspective. And my take is, well, yeah, but that's great from the engineering point of view of game designer and publisher, and it's sure as shit good public relations
Right.
because now
But I'm I'm
everybody,
I'm
yeah,
I'm a cladistics guy. I can't
right.
help but like if you know you sit around like stuff and you know
Yeah, yeah, I
so
am too. And so therefore I tend to say, well, yeah, but the scientist is seeing these things.
yeah.
So,
The
you
funny
know,
thing in our little group, in our little this little consortium we have, where we pretend to like make up stuff,
yeah.
we discuss some really good topics, really good. But there are people there that like we can talk, we can discuss things. We could never play a game together.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
like, because we would kill each other. We would
Yeah.
kill each
Yeah.
other,
I
and
mean,
it's
we
funny.
just
Sometimes
don't
it's
come here for the same reason, man. We just don't.
yeah, it's just it's
So, yeah.
and so it's one person, and we're friendly, we like each other, we kill each other, but it's
Yeah.
black and white. And I had a discussion with this my friend Brian the other day, and he's the guy we're talking about. We're 98% there. We're just
Right.
about there. Um, I would say, and this is personal bias, I would say at some end, Brian probably is more about the story and the story elements, and I'm more about being right there
Yeah.
in the moment. And
Yeah.
I'm the guy that wants that more of because I don't, as far as I can tell, I just don't care.
Right.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's nifty. It's more like, we were talking about like it's more like the Jaws experience, where like when I play All for One with Anthony and Francois and you used to with Sebastian, you'd enjoy these other characters, but it wasn't a story. It's like you got to know them better, and it was
Right.
like these three men in a boat,
Right.
and there wasn't like it's
It's a
so, but it was different.
yeah, it's a really uh it's not something, that I go to duels over these days.
Right,
And the my argument from the beginning was to just talk about that level of perspective. Here's what I finally got around to saying, and I know I said it in the phenomenology, finally,
right,
but it was that the internal personal state is less interesting to me than the state to which the overlap occurs at the table, and what does that overlap look like? So if we were
yeah,
talking about the friend of yours with the 98%, I'm really, really interested in what the 90%, the 98% looks like.
right,
And that's what I want to focus on. I had a conversation at Adepts Play recently, where we were talking about Dungeon World, and a
mhm,
group who was playing Dungeon World. And I was kind of the dick in the conversation saying, I'm not seeing where the fun is. You keep saying, I had fun, but I don't see any we. In fact,
right,
everything in your account seems to like kind of diminish the we fun. You know, the collective, the way. I don't see anything where you say you enjoyed what another person did. I don't see anybody. All of the fun you're describing is all like sucked back into your own head, and nobody else saw it. So, what was the shared fun? And that really was, you can see in the conversation how a third party really suffered over me. Like he said, you're telling that guy he didn't have fun. I'm saying, no, I'm interested in how they had fun. I want to know
right,
how that happened and what did that look like. And that's what I would be calling the creative agenda of their game.
right. Yeah, that's
Instead
actually
of,
probably where
yeah,
that's where one of my friends and I come to blows about is they
right,
want to like, 'cause a lot of my experience tends to be internal. I
right,
definitely enjoy other people enjoy what I do, I think,
right,
but she's like, well, why don't you tell us about like the internal state of your character? I'm like, because I wouldn't do that in real life either.
right, which is
you know,
fine.
but
And so, yeah,
there's a lot of stuff going on
right,
that maybe I'll tell you afterwards,
yeah,
but like in game sometimes, I won't say, well, Jack, Philippe just had this real revelation about his mother. Like, no,
right,
no, I'm thinking,
right.
but in my head, I'm
No.
thinking about that.
And actually, you may be interested to know that my presence at the table is a bit similar to yours. I'll never
Yeah.
explain. I rarely, if ever, explain where my character is coming from. Maybe just
Right.
after I do something, if everybody's looking at me funny at most,
Yeah.
because I actually would prefer it to come out through the action
Right.
than any other way. And so it's kind of interesting. I'm interested if you want to know from a theoretical perspective, I would love to be playing with you and this other guy in particular
Yeah.
and see whether the collective overlap what it looked like.
Oh yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
not
That'd
try
be
to
kind of
force
cool.
it at all. Just play me,
Yeah.
be me, and we're all playing together, and realize that we probably are listening to each other. I'd be looking at the place where someone spoke and someone responded. Someone spoke, someone responded. Even if that response was 3 sessions later and based on what my character did, but there was a
Right.
response somewhere, right?
Right.
And I would look at those and say, now where's the priority in that, if there
Right.
is one? That's where I would be looking. I'm much less about the Myers-Briggs approach of where am I, who am I, what am I.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm done with that. That's not what I ever wanted to do. My take was back then, it was clear that a lot of people had a bone in their throat about fun in play.
Right.
And that they wouldn't get it out unless they had fun in a certain way. And what we saw over the years was that when people had fun in the way that they had been choking them all this time, then they were kind of like, oh, what are the other ways now? You know?
Right.
And they would come back saying, I just had a blast playing this other way that I would have spit on a few years ago because they were so focused on that way that they weren't having fun.
Right.
And they needed to do it. They weren't going to have fun role playing until they got it, a particular way. And so that's why I would say, yeah, I can classify people according to these GNS things, but I realized that it was a very much of a pathological
Right.
classification. It was the thing that they often people often were so stressed about. And that
Right.
once you became unstressed, it was like I was talking about at some other point recently. It's almost as though once you're through the door, you don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. No,
You
I
don't
get.
want
I
to
get that. And
you don't
I've.
want to you don't want to stress over this anymore. It's not an issue. And yet to the person who's in that door and stressing about it, it's very much an issue.
Yeah, and I've
So,
had that. Other areas of my life, I've had that experience. I
yeah,
won't go down that rabbit hole, but like there's definitely. I get that. I get that phenomenon. It's funny. I forgot the last part, but that's probably a good segue for is the other part where I found heard that like Ron might be the devil as you're talking about as you're talking about various games and you're talking about like incoherence or and you're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and at this point I'm still like really trying to claw into like what's this essential game that I remember back from 20 years ago, and it ain't Pathfinder, it isn't fourth
right,
edition, it's not all this other stuff, and I think it's this, and I'm realizing it might be more like Molde, uh, and then I'm getting this like, well, Dungeons and Dragons can't do this or this, and I mean, I'll never say anything bad about it because I love the hell out of Lamentations of the Flame Princess and stuff,
yeah,
but it is what it is. But I started, having these things where I look at other games. I'm like, what is the real essence of, or what's the essence? What's the essential part of this game that what makes me like it? And then it's like, well, wait a minute, it can't do this fantasy novel or that fantasy novel. And I started to become really, really fascinated just in mechanics and systems. Like, well, how can you make that happen? Which is
right,
like,
right,
I don't think I could ever write a game. I would love to try, but I don't think that's my gig. But like looking at things, looking at like the magic system and like in Circle of Hands, or looking at the magic system and oh crap, I'm drawing a blank here right now. But like in Desolation, the Greymalkin ubiquity based game where you can pretty much cast just about all kinds of stuff, but you suffer burn, like you
right,
can kill yourself.
right,
And I was like, well, that looks a lot more like Wizard's First Rule or this or that or all these other novels on my shelf. It's like, yeah, that's something that's crazy,
right.
And
Or
I'm like,
or the
that
thing that
looks
we all suffered over way back when was how much we enjoyed the Wizard of Earthsea novels, the Earthsea
right,
novels, the trilogy, and then realized that we did not know a single role playing game that had a damn thing to do that could do that.
right,
How on earth was this so viable in these novels and so inviable in terms of the systemic array of role playing?
right,
And I'm not saying, I mean, actually now I have a different perspective. But for example, Vancian magic, There's
Right.
a little game draft that I wrote in 1999 that has never seen print. It's been mined very thoroughly by any number of other authors since then
Right.
because I passed it around for a while. And I called it Fantasy for Real. And it was based on Cudgel the Clever and related fiction by
Right.
Jack Vance. And the way, and I actually was inspired by a friend of mine who came up with this idea, which was that, and I think I tweaked it a little bit. So what's on paper is something of my massaged version of his idea. But the eventual result was that you chose how many words your spell name had in it.
Yeah.
And then you rolled on the tables for the name of the spell.
Oh,
And
good
that's the
God.
spell that your character currently had available to them, and you retrofit that it was one of the
Right.
ones that he'd memorized.
Right.
And
That's awesome.
then you figured out what the fuck it did based on the
Right.
name. And the trouble was that it was more powerful based on the more words, but also the more risky in terms of it going kerflooey.
Right. Yeah.
And so you chose just how much power you really wanted in this, and of course that made the more elaborate name. And so of
Right.
course I had wonderful fun making the lists, and the when the amazing iron vibration, which came out of actual play, got thrown, you were kind of like, wow, the amazing iron vibration.
Right on.
Fuck now. Oh, you know what? It wasn't the number of words, it was the number of syllables. You didn't
Oh God.
know
Yeah.
how many. I mean, the more
Yeah.
words that you chose, the more syllables you'd get, but there were some long
Mm.
words in there. So
Yeah.
you could come up with a real whopper if you weren't, even with a couple of words.
Yeah. That's
So it
fantastic.
was a lot of fun. It was kooky as hell, and it was way fun to play. And it's, as I say, I mean, many aspects of that system have been mined, but to me, that was how you thought about memorize, fire, and forget Jack Vance magic, because
Right.
that's how he
Yeah.
did it
That's
in many ways. We all know that he didn't have spell lists that he decided what the wizards memorized and then wrote the story based on that. He didn't do that, you
right.
know. And so the notion of magic systems as more than a bandolier of capability for tactical purposes, even though your characters may think of them that way,
Right.
and so really, though, I'm trying to say I completely agree with you about the systemic approach and saying, goodness gracious, the way that these rules are structured actually plays into how we're going to do this.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
and using that as a jumping off point for softer stuff that isn't in the rules is really something that has not received enough attention. I really dislike the idea of a game system perceiving a role playing system as something that just locks you down into doing just those things on paper. I know that's not the
Yeah.
case. I'm saying
Right.
system matters, not it is all there is. That the words on paper, the rules text,
Right.
system to me is something that you do and so will include outcomes that aren't on paper, you know.
Right.
So what is that? And that really is poorly developed I mean, in our understanding of the hobby.
Oh yeah.
What is it about the game I played for years with James Malazewski when we played Empire of the Petal Throne, in a game that's going on right now? It continues, and I'm really hoping to jump back in. Um, what we were talking about it, the game itself, which when we're playing like mid 70s
Right.
text, and there's stuff that we have done with it that has become pretty much systemic by now in that group,
Yeah.
that only occurred because we were playing without it and we made it happen.
Right.
Well, that's kind of interesting, you know. Um, is that people taking an inadequate game text and making it a better system at the table? Or is that a virtue of that skeletal game text and the richness of the setting and our wanting to do the setting, that is
Right.
that a virtue? right, of that setup.
Yeah, that was
And that
really
and
a
I'm
prob.
not gonna take sides on that right now. That's a very difficult
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
yeah, that was probably the focal point of my first YouTube video ever,
Right.
because it was, to me, it was the it was the number of rules. Not that that's like a, the, end all be all argument, but it was like this one fellow, his thing was, he did not want to have to stop his game to make something up, or to, like,
Right.
to me, I didn't want to have to stop my game to look it up in the damn book. And so, like, what do the mechanics really cover? What are the important things it covers? And then there's all these other holes. Is that a feature? Is that a flaw?
Yeah.
You
And
don't you don't have to take sides, but that's a
yeah.
big
And, and,
that's a
and
big thing.
I'm pretty sure that in the constellation of available games, I'm definitely going to point to ones where I think there's a flaw, that they are basically handing you. And sometimes, interestingly enough, it's not because it's too skeletal, it's because it's too much.
Right,
I don't know. I can think of some things where I'm saying, okay, that is a working skeleton, and you are asking too much of me. I want more inspiration. I want
right,
more, as I said in the phenomenology, I want more bounce.
right,
And this was the case with a lot of the generic systems that were post GURPS,
right,
that would say, okay, we've got it covered. And I would say, no, you've got X covered, but I'm not seeing the bounce. I'm seeing a bunch of, I'm completely, when it comes to a car crash, I am completely oriented. When it comes to how strong my character is, I am completely oriented. When it comes to just how schizophrenic he is, I am completely oriented. Your point structure have done all those things.
right,
Now I don't know why I want to play,
right.
you know?
Yeah,
And so I think that there is a place for instability. If that instability is in outcomes, that's awesome. If it's in setting concepts, that's awesome. If it's in character motivations, that's awesome. I want to know where that is. I want to know where what you're giving me is trembling, right, with possibility.
right,
In the Tecmo game, in the Pedal Throne game, it really came down to our embrace of playing. We were doing the right thing. We were playing the people who were invested in the dark gods, the chaos
right,
gods. What has come to be called, instead of chaos, the change gods. But
right.
they're scary, right? They sacrifice people. They deliberately uproot stable social structures. They feel quite they're quite happy with raising the dead and staying married to them. In fact, one of the player characters was quite dedicated to digging up dearly beloved. In fact,
Yeah,
was very irritated on coming back from an adventure after months and everybody thought he was dead, so the family had interred dearly beloved.
no, that's not good.
No, what are you doing?
Exactly.
Dig her up, you sons of bitches. I came back with all the magic I need for she can walk
Right.
now.
Yeah.
We're getting married and we're going back to bed. Thank you very much. And if you have a problem with
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah.
and
That's, yeah.
so and so we're playing these people. My character came from a temple where human sacrifice was the deal, and fully a temple dancer, and is fully committed to being respected enough by her temple that she will one day be, you know, not the Tuesday sacrifice for me, buddy. You know,
Right. Exactly.
and so it's it and our embrace of that stuff became a little bit I don't know if it became disturbing. It certainly became enriching. It certainly became exciting. The way that we handled problems, the way that we took clan obligations seriously and yet didn't want to be pushed around by the clan elders. Um,
Right.
that kind of stuff became fairly strong and became, if you will, behavior rules. I don't
Right.
know if you could ever put points in them, but we were playing as if there were rules by which our characters behaved. And maybe in retrospect, somebody could retrofit some kind of verbal version of those rules, into place. And so, yeah, we became there. There's social and behavioral standards by which we enjoyed our characters acting, and
Right.
some of it was my input. There was some things I did that people got turned on by, and then there were things other people players did that were the same. All of us, some faster than others, some by example, some by meeting and raising the examples,
Right.
became to the point where all of us in play were like really happy that each other was playing.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I don't think that's a
so,
hell of a lot different than
yeah. Whoop, I missed you on that one.
isolated groups. I don't
Yeah,
think it's different than a lot of some of those isolated groups. I mean, just to go back to the D&D example for a
sure.
second, they
Yeah,
you develop this culture of play over years. I have friends that played for 20 years the same game, but if
absolutely.
you go there and you see some of the things they do, like some of their unspoken rules or behavior,
Right,
you're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, where
right,
did that come from? That's not in the book.
right,
It's
right.
not in any of the books I've ever
And
read,
so
but
it's
it's
and so it becomes very interesting to realize that I mean, my argument, and there are people who vociferously resist this concept, is that they're doing game design.
right.
And that a lot of published games are when somebody did say, well, holy shit, the same thing. They say, what are we doing?
Right.
What, give me a pen. I
Yeah.
gotta
Oh
I
yeah.
gotta
That's
write
that's
this
it.
down. Right. And so it to me, there's value there that I would like to sort of praise as game design. Well, gotta look out. Ideologically speaking, there are people who are offended by being, no, I'm not, no, we're not. We're honoring the text. you know this is what you were supposed to do with it. And and again, yeah, I cock my head back and forth and say, well, maybe yes, maybe no. I don't have a direct answer, but I will say that honoring and raising the text to a level of experience that is your own and is very powerful is one thing.
Right.
Doing game design is another, whether that, but I'll be the first to say that line's a blur.
Right.
you
Exactly.
know
Yeah.
Difficult to keep focusing on the text because the text will never be anything but text. They're words on a page.
Right.